Now, okay, there we are.
Okay.
Okay. Is that better? Can you see him better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I should.
So this morning, the sun is shining.
Olay.
The sun is shining again for us. The air is flowing around the world. The ground is under our feet. The ground is important, isn't it?
I likes it.
Yeah, and so the world is a wonderful and mysterious place if we recognize it as such. How is it that we have a sun that shines on us and brings light and warmth to the planet, makes life possible? How is it we have air to breathe, that we have a floor underneath our feet, and we have this living body, this mystery of 30 trillion cells? Imagine we start off as one cell, and now we are 30 trillion cells. I had my first grandchild born about 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Olay.
Thank you. How many have grandchildren? How many have grandchildren? No. So, okay, you have some grandchildren there. It's a wonder to see a baby come into the world. It's so mind-boggling. You don't have any clue of how this is all possible. The traditional answer has been what? What's the traditional answer to how this is all possible? It has been called God, yes?
God's grace.
Huh?
By God's grace.
By God's grace, by God's grace.
Grace.
The world exists by God's grace. What is the world and what is God? And these questions keep coming up for us. How do we understand God in the modern age of science? Some scientists would rather not talk about God. Some scientists believe only in their test tubes and formulas, and have a narrow view of the world of God. But others feel that God is still here and is the underlying mystery of all things. Every breath we take is a miracle, right? Every breath contains the essence of life, the fundamental energy that we need to maintain ourselves. You can get along without food and even water for days, but we need to breathe all the time, even when we sleep. It is very difficult to understand, I think, or to find out why it is we need to breathe. Isn't that a good question? Why do we need to breathe?
For number one.
What's that?
In order to live, number one.
Yes, it's vital for if we want to live. There is something in the air that contains the spark of life. There is something in the air that enables life to proceed, whether you're a lizard or a frog or an elephant or even a whale. You need to breathe the air. There is something very special in the air, which we call what?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. Oxygen. Oxygen is a very special atom. Hmm? There are all kinds of atoms that make up the world, that make up our bodies, that make up the floor underneath our feet, that make up the chair we're sitting in. How amazing. That make up every cell in the body. There are 92 different kinds of atoms, we understand now. 92 different configurations of the same thing. All atoms are made of the same things. Isn't that interesting? Whether it's oxygen or nitrogen or carbon or hydrogen, all atoms are made of the same things. They're just put together a little differently. And I think that's really extraordinary. Because how is it that these atoms have such different qualities? Oxygen has a quality, silver has a quality, gold has a quality, what else? Silicon, which is basically sand, has a quality. And it's very interesting how these atoms fit into the world and make the world. An insect is made of atoms. The shell of an insect, which is his skeleton, that's really interesting. Insects have their skeletons on the outside. They're not made of bone, but they're made of something that's remarkable, that keeps the outside out and the inside in, and enables the insect to move around and have its life. And it's a very deep mystery how this skeleton of an insect ever came about. It's a mystery how our bones ever came about, or the stuff in our noses and ears and joints, which is called collagen, which is a kind of protein that enables this flexible stuff that makes for our ears and nose and the things that hold the muscles onto the bones. It's a very special substance. And how did that ever come out? How did that ever occur? How did our muscles ever come about? You know, muscles are very complicated instruments. We only learn how they work in the last 75 years or so. And the muscles form our way of moving about. And it's quite remarkable how that happens and how that evolved over time. The first life on Earth didn't have muscles. It didn't have bones. It didn't have a shell of an insect. It didn't have the bark of a tree. It was only a tiny little cell in water. A cell you couldn't even see. And yet that thing, that miracle, occurred on the earth. How? Nobody knows. At least the scientists don't know. I'm not anti-science, by the way, but I think science has to broaden its understanding. The world is a great mystery. Each moment of our lives is a great mystery. We are here through some amazing gift of life. Life, you might say, life is the most extraordinary thing in the universe. How did the universe create life? How does the universe sustain life? We don't know the answers to these questions, although we do know that it is the sun from which we get our energy. And that's a miracle in itself. The sun has been burning for 5 billion years. Every day the sun rises. We don't think much about it, but it's really quite a wonder. And I've often said in this class that if the sun were made of coal or wood, it would have burned out a long time ago. But it works because of these things we call atoms and the peculiar way they interact with each other. The atoms are designed to make the sun work. How strange is that? If the atoms were a different design in a different way, the sun wouldn't work. The way the sun works is that atoms are crushed together and energy is squeezed out of those atoms. Light is contained by the atoms. How weird is that? In the atoms, in all the atoms, we have the potential for light. I find that amazing. The light that comes into this room occurs because light is an inherent property of atoms. Every time an atom changes its energy level, which means it gets hotter or cooler, light is given off or light is absorbed. And in the sun, light is given off because of the tremendous temperatures that are reached in the center of the sun. We have temperatures of 15 million degrees or more in the center of the sun that continues to generate light and warmth for our planet. It's totally amazing. And then we understand now that the universe began about 14 billion years ago, which sounds like a long time, but I suspect that the universe is far, far older than that. This is simply the current universe, the current example of the universe as a recurring theme over and over again. In the religion of India, the universe is thought of as having a birth and a life and a death. And that birth and life and death is called one breath of God. Every time God breathes out, the universe appears, and every time God inhales, the universe disappears. And the universe appears and disappears continuously over time. This is according to the Hindu ideas about the universe, the cosmos. Certainly, when our universe appeared, you would think that it didn't just happen, because in the first instant of the universe, something was brought into existence, namely atoms. Why should atoms come into existence? What came before the universe that gave rise to atoms? Hmm? If atoms hadn't occurred, if atoms weren't born in the first moments of the universe, we wouldn't be sitting here. So it's extraordinary that the atoms appeared early on, or rather, what appeared were the simple atoms such as hydrogen and helium. But what's interesting is that you can make a star out of hydrogen or helium, or our sun, is a star, right? Our sun is made of hydrogen and helium. And that's how the stars began in the beginning of time. But you couldn't make a world like the Earth from that universe, because you can't make a world like the Earth just out of hydrogen and helium. You can't make a giraffe out of hydrogen, or a frog, or a snail, or a tree. You need things like nitrogen, and carbon, and oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus. All the cells in our body contain phosphorus. Every cell in our body has a membrane, a little shield that keeps the inside in and the outside out. And that is a wondrous little thing, a wondrous little layer that contains phosphorus in it. But phosphorus wasn't present in the early universe. Where did it come from? We can only answer this question now, after 100 years of research. We can only answer this question now in that we discovered that the elements, most of the elements around us, the elements in our bodies, the elements in the chair we're sitting on, the elements in the air we're breathing. And when I say element, that means atoms. So the air we're breathing and the chair we're sitting on and our bodies are made of these atoms, which came about later in time after the universe began. And these atoms or elements were made in the stars. How amazing is that? Not only did the stars light up the universe, but the stars made the very things that make life possible, that make our being possible. The trees, the flowers, the birds, all the things of the world are made of atoms or elements, as we call them, that were made in the stars. A great design, no? Where is the designer? Hmm? Hmm? What's that, Wayne? Don't know. It's a good question, no? I always ask questions that no one can answer. I can't answer them.
It is the question. It is the question. It will always be the question.
Excuse me?
It will always be the question.
We can always be.
What you just said will always be the question.
The first.
The first life, where?
I can't hear you, Wayne. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. I have to turn up my sound here. Okay. Okay. So the universe seems to be designed. The universe seems to have a plan. In the beginning, there is the universe that erupted in a great outpouring of energy and matter. But they were only hydrogen atoms and helium atoms. If you like, I can go into what an atom is, but maybe some other time. But in the beginning, there were only hydrogen and helium atoms. There were no stars. There were no planets. Nothing like Earth could exist then because there was no oxygen. There was no oxygen to make water. Consider this mystery, this world we're living in, as a great design, as a great template for possibility. Out of this world of hydrogen and helium, after a few 100 million years came the first stars. In the Bible it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was void, and God said, let there be light. But I believe it says, and maybe somebody can help me out with this, it says that God created the sun and the earth, not on the first day, but the second or third day, I can't remember. But in the beginning there was light, and then there was darkness. Darkness on the face of the deep. But eventually the stars formed out of these great clouds of hydrogen gas. How incredible is that? That is a wonder of wonders. When the sun rises in the morning, we have an ongoing mystery, an ongoing I'm not sure of the right word to use. How is it that the sun is able to sustain itself over time? How is it that it can burn for 10 billion years? That's a long time, 10 billion years. And yet our sun is capable of burning for 10 billion years. Now, scientists tell us today that the sun increases its temperature every billion years, so that in the beginning, the sun was much weaker than it is today. In a billion years from now, the sun will put out so much energy that life will become pretty difficult on the earth, if not impossible. So we've got about a billion years, not a million, a billion, that's a long time. A billion years to figure out maybe how to go to another planet, somewhere else. where the sun is not so strong. What's that? Yeah, you have to really speak up because um, with the mask on and everything, it's hard. It's hard to hear you. Oh, um, I really can't hear you. I'm sorry. Um, so we live in a world in which the miracle of the atoms has created the sun, all the planets, our particular planet that has water on it, that has an atmosphere. You know, if you go to Mars, there's not much water, there's not much air. You can't live on Mars just without importing air and water. You could not live on Mars. Although some scientists think there may be water underground, and that's possible. Um, but Mars is not like the Earth. Neither is Venus. Neither is Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. No planet is like the Earth, where life has burgeoned, where life has erupted, where the waters cover the Earth and make life possible. It is very strange how the Earth changed over time. The Earth began without oxygen in the air. You could not have lived on planet Earth when it first formed. No animal could have lived on the Earth. No animal that we know of today could have lived on the Earth when it first appeared, when it first formed. Only certain bacteria could have lived because they don't need oxygen. So the early Earth was a very different place than it is today. How did it become the way it is today? I don't expect you to answer that. I can't answer. However, we do know something about the world now. We do know that the world changed over time, and that because life contains a potential to change, we are here today. If life didn't have a potential to change, there would be only bacteria on the earth. Life you couldn't even see. For 2 billion years, there was only bacteria. If you came here from another planet, you would look around and you would say, boy, there's no life here. But if someone got a little water and put it under a microscope, you would be able to tell that there was indeed life, but it was very tiny, very small, and confined to the waters of the world. How did elephants come about? How did great trees come about? Forests covering the earth, jungles, landscapes of all kinds, palm trees and cactuses and orchids and tomatoes, and how did all this come to be? Now, my feeling after studying this for some time is that life contains a potential, or that the atoms, you might say, contains a potential. That we are here because life has possibilities. So the early bacteria that formed, that were the first life, contained the seeds of possibility. Contained the seeds of what would come next. Without that possibility, we wouldn't be here. The world as we know it wouldn't be here. So, inherent, I like that word inherent. What does that mean? It means that there is something hidden, something tied up into, something fundamentally connected with, inherent in the first life was all life that we see today. Any questions? I think it's important to try to understand this reality, this underlying reality that is contained in all of us, in all things. I'm going to read a poem. This is called Lingering in Happiness. After rain, after many days without rain, it stays cool, private and cleansed under the trees, and the dampness there. The dampness now married to gravity, falls branch to branch, leaf to leaf, down to the ground, where it will disappear, but not, of course, vanish except to our eyes. The roots of the oaks will have their share, and the white threads of the grasses, and the cushion of moss. A few drops, round as pearls, will enter the mole's tunnel. And so many, and soon so many small stones, buried for 1,000 years, will feel themselves being touched. So this is a poem by Mary Oliver, my favorite poet, and here's a wonderful book of hers called Devotions. And Mary Oliver loved nature and felt nature was a sacred reality, that God was contained in nature, not just out there somewhere, but right here, right in front of us. The mystery of God was the mystery of life. In every leaf, there is a wonder. In every leaf, there is a connection to the sun. Every leaf unfurls itself and receives the light of the sun and uses that light to make its food. In return, the leaf gives off oxygen so that we might breathe. How amazing is that? Is that just a coincidence? Is God in all things? Is God a mystery in all things? You know, when I was growing up, and I come from a Jewish household, and in the Jewish prayers, there's usually a place where there is a word that is missing, and there is only a symbol for that word there. And that word is the name of God. My mother used to say, you don't say the name of God. God is a mystery. God is beyond our comprehension. In the Muslim world, in Muslim churches, there is no depiction of God. There are designs, but there is no image of God. And what these statements mean is that we shouldn't put God in a box. We shouldn't say God is this way, because God is always more. God is always more than we can understand, comprehend. But somehow we can know that we are held in God's design. The great mystery of the world you could say is God's design. Any questions or comments? And so every time we walk across a floor or pick up a piece of toast or have a cup of coffee, we are entering in a mystery. The coffee we're drinking comes from a bean, comes from a certain tree, a flowering tree. Here's a tomato, a tangerine, a pear. These all come from flowering trees. The flowering tree didn't come about until about 135 million years ago. You couldn't have a cup of coffee then, because there were no, before then, I should say before then, you couldn't have a cup of coffee because there were no flowering trees. The flowering trees today give rise to what most of us are eating or drinking. And without the flowering trees, life would be very different. How the flowering trees happened is a mystery. I just don't mean trees, I mean plants of all kinds. But about 135 million years ago, the first tiny flower appeared. And after that, flowering trees of all kinds and plants encircled the world and branched out into many, many different kinds. And today we have about 300,000 different kinds of plants and trees that make up most of the plant world. And because they are flowering trees, we have such great variety of things and such wonderful things to nurture us, like wheat, for example, which is a flowering grass, corn, rye, oats, barley, rice are all flowering grasses. and would not have been possible unless this revolution in flowering plants took place, which happened about 135 million years ago when the dinosaurs were walking around. And the first bees and ants and wasps and things, the first bees appeared about the same time as the flowering plants. How incredible is that? One thing leads to another, which comes back to the idea that life contains a potential, and life unfolds as things allow it to unfold. One of the reasons we think life changes over time is the increase in oxygen in the atmosphere. As I mentioned earlier, the Earth did not have much oxygen in the beginning, and so life was very simple. When the oxygen levels increased, it's possible that a new kinds of life developed. Life that you could now see. Life that thrived in new places, like the land. Which is another one of the great revolutions in life. For a long time, for billions of years, life was only in the waters of the world, the fresh waters and the oceans. Life was not on the land, except maybe for some bacteria, which, like the bacteria in our bathtubs, which you can see sometimes as little, like a little orange film. Those are bacteria, and they may have been on the land early on, but that's about it. At some point, a new type of cell arose, and we don't know why, but a new type of cell arose that made the life that we know today possible. And that happened about 2 billion years ago. And it could be because oxygen levels, which were made by the tiny bacteria of the time, oxygen levels may have reached a certain point where the new type of life in the new kind of cell was possible. So life follows life. Life is influenced by changes that life creates in the world. As more oxygen is available, more kinds of life become possible. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that incredible that life has the possibilities within it so that it can change over time, that it can become giraffes and chimpanzees and frogs and snakes and koala bears and trees and avocados and coconuts and you name it, right? I mean, how is this? Look around and go to the supermarket and you see all these varieties of things, and it's all because life has this potential to change and to become. I mean, today we have, I don't know how many varieties of dogs. Anyone have a dog? You know? There's so many different varieties of dogs, but a few thousand years ago, there were only very few. But humans combined different dogs, and out of those combinations came new types of dogs. Isn't that interesting? So you could say that life has this potential to become different things that is inherent inherent, I like that word, inherent in life itself. Look at all the varieties of insects we have. There are, how many insects, different kinds of insects? We have at least 1 million different kinds of insects. We have 25,000 different kinds of fish, 10,000 different kinds of birds. I don't know how many mammals. I think it's 4,000 different kinds of mammals. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, lots of different kinds of mammals and hundreds of thousands of different kinds of plants and trees. And all of these things evolve from one kind of life. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Questions, comments? So, do you find this interesting? Yeah? The story of life, the story of the universe is very fascinating. It's truly amazing, truly a wonder. And today we're lucky that we have an understanding about it that was not available to us even 100 years ago. We thought the universe was much smaller 100 years ago. We didn't know how the sun worked. We didn't know how the atoms evolved. The atoms themselves evolved. That's one of the most amazing stories. The atoms were made in stars. So that we're sitting here, we are star stuff. We are made of the stuff of stars. As stars burn, they make heavier and heavier atoms, and they throw off these atoms into space. And those atoms combine with new stars and new planets. And that's why we're here. We are literally made of the stars. That's pretty amazing, no?
God is like, just like our parents.
God is like our parents. Yeah. All things come from a great mystery, a great living mystery, I believe. I think all things are alive in some way. What do you think? Do you think that is possible? Huh?
I think it's possible.
Thank you. Thank you. They say life can only come from life. If that's so, then everything must be alive because life is made of the basic stuff of the universe, the atoms. And in some way, the atoms might be alive. Certainly, they're full of activity. Life is full of activity. The atoms, the parts of the atoms, which when we went to school, we learned there were protons and neutrons, electrons, tiny, tiny particles that we now know are more like musical notes. They're little vibrations, little vibratory things that are really quite indescribable. But they're vibrating and interacting like musical notes with each other. They respond to each other. They change their pitch and tone when they combine. One of the most amazing things about the atoms is their ability to combine and create new things. So we have something like oxygen and hydrogen, which makes water. Why should that be? Why don't they just stay by themselves? Why don't they just stick to their own kind? Why don't they just not want to make something different? And yet they do. Why do we have salt, which is what? Sodium, an atom like is a metal. Sodium is a kind of strange metal. If you throw it in a glass of water, it bursts into flames. How weird is that? So sodium and chlorine, which is a poisonous gas, combine to make salt, which is harmless in ordinary amounts. How did these two relatively poisonous things combine to make harmless salt? That's pretty amazing. Without salt, we couldn't communicate. Our cells couldn't communicate. Our nervous systems wouldn't work. And there it is. We have salt. Plants take hydrogen from water, oxygen from water, and carbon from the air to make sugar. That sugar powers all plants and animals in the world. It is the basic food of the world. The sugar we get from wheat or rice or oats or the milk in the coffee. But why is it that hydrogen and oxygen and carbon make sugar? So we have, in the very makeup of the atoms, we have this potential for life. We have this potential for the structure of life, the possibility of life. You know, today we learn so much in school, and we all were involved in our lives, our careers. And yet what they don't usually teach us in school is how to appreciate the world around us. How to appreciate the very fact that there is air, or a sun, or the ground under our feet. Or life. I want you to try a little experiment. Next time you walk across the floor, feel the floor under your feet. Touch the floor. Become connected to the floor and know that you are touching some great mystery, some great wonder. I want to thank all of you for being in class today. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope you will take something away from the talk and enter this mystery, this wonder. I hope you'll be in class next week. I wish you all well and have a wonderful afternoon and lunch. Let's not discount lunch. Speaking of wonders, take care and be well. It's a pleasure to see everybody and be with you today. Really mean that. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. I love all of you. Thank you very much. Take care. Be well. All right. Stay safe, everybody.
Keep
Thank you. Thank you. You too. Thank you.
I see you, Wayne. I think so. I guess so. You don't see. I believe he is. Yeah. We can go now. I mean, you know. Where'd you going? Sit down in the main area.
In the main area.
Where we were.
Where we
Sit
were.
down where we want.
Check your bag.
Well,
All right,
that's
thank you
important.
so much, everyone. All righty.
That was interesting.
Mhm.
Very
You're ready, sir.
Very interesting.
Good. I'm glad you like